go. We are now live on Facebook. I believe we got Rumble and YouTube on here as well. Thanks for joining us today. Oh, we got some some major updates. I'd say major updates today. We got Gators, custom guns. We got some other Second Amendment updates, maybe some medical freedom updates. We'll see what we can get in with the short time we got. Just so you all know, anybody listening, we will be in Vancouver this weekend. Pete and I will be visiting the Patriots United. We'll be there at a table, meet and greet. If you want to come talk to us, it'd be great. We think we'll have some swag there for you to purchase if you want to. So swing on by. But I'm going to kick it over here to Pete. I'm going to make sure everything is going good in the background, and Pete's going to kind of kick it off with some updates.
Yeah, so sorry for the delayed update, but last week we had a hearing last Friday. Was it last Friday or Monday? Anyway, it was either last week or this Monday. Sometime recently, we had a hearing down in Cowlitz County on Gators Custom Guns. And for anyone who has been following us, they know that's a critical Second Amendment case or Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington Constitution, which is the right to bear arms. And in that case, there are two cases, one where we sued the state and one where the state sued Gators Custom Guns, both for violations or alleged violations of House Bill or Senate Bill 5078, which is the greater than 10-round magazines. Anyone watching this video probably calls those standard capacity magazines. The state loves to call them large capacity magazines. But the misnomer and all, we'll get through it. What we had in the first hearing was our lawsuit challenging the state's civil investigative demand. And what happens is under the Consumer Protection Act, the state attorney general has authority to basically investigate your business by issuing paperwork saying, hey, you need to swear by penalty of perjury. We believe you violated the Consumer Protection Act. You need to swear under penalty of perjury that you didn't or that you did, and give us the documentation related to it. And so, of course, the claim was that the violation of the Consumer Protection Act was violation of selling these magazines. And we sued, and I want to walk through this case because there are so many good things that happened during this hearing. The first question was whether or not we even filed the paperwork timely. Now, we believed, obviously, we wouldn't have filed the lawsuit, that it was timely. It had to do with the way that our client was served. He was served via mail, and then it was also served in person. And we said, no, Your Honor, because the first actual service occurred via mail, that extends it a couple days out. And the judge came back and said, you know what, you're right, this is timely. And I mean, I just want to be flat out honest here. If that's a Thurston County court, I think we get dismissed on timeliness, whether we're right or wrong. And so, you know, that's win number one. The fact that he said it was timely, again, the state disputed it. We didn't dispute it. We thought we were timely. But to have a court actually agree with us felt really good, even on a simple issue like that. But the global issue was, once the state dismissed the civil investigative demand, they said this case is no longer valid. It's what they call moot. In other words, there's no relief the court can grant. And we said, no, that's not true, because we're challenging the constitutionality of Senate Bill 5078. And in so doing, that case remains as live until a judge says that it's either constitutional or not constitutional. And the judge said, you know what? I know there's this whole other prosecution for the alleged sales of about 1,100 magazines, and I don't really care about that case. I'm going to consolidate the two cases, but for the next 3 months, you guys develop a briefing schedule and a hearing schedule only on whether this bill is constitutional. And so we've kicked back a proposal back and forth. The goal right now is to have this thing briefed. There are 3 elements to briefing. There's an opening brief, a response, and then a reply brief. And making sure that we have enough time, we're trying to give ourselves about 2 weeks between each. And so our goal is to have this thing briefed out by the beginning of December. and have a hearing in December on the constitutionality. And we think that this will, one, the judge just, he cares about the Constitution. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put that question in front of him as the lone question he wants to hear. So I think that's important. He seems to believe there is a question of whether this is not constitutional. And so that's huge. We've had other judges that are like, in our 1240 case, assault weapons bans aren't arms protected by the Constitution. It's like, where the hell did you get that?
Right. So let's try and make this as clear for the average Joe here. This, I'm going to call it a win. Would you call this a win?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
yeah, we have a judge who cares about the Constitution and is asking us to tell him why this is unconstitutional.
And we get to stay in a county that, cares about the Constitution.
That cares about the Constitution, right?
Incredible.
Yeah. So it's a huge. Again, we've often talked about this. We file things in certain counties because those 39 county representatives have the opportunity to speak for their local public. And likewise, the local public gets to speak when they elect those people. When everything goes to Thurston County, we kind of know what the MO is and where the trajectory is. It's like, okay, we got to get to the Supreme Court, either state or U.S. or both. Here, there's no question that it eventually gets there, but it's nice to go on a winning record as opposed to having to peel it up on a loss, especially when there's no question that this is an unconstitutional law.
Yeah. I like to use the word record because our primary adversary here, Attorney General Bob Ferguson, who loves to call us the gun lobby here, talks about his record against the gun lobby and says that he's undefeated. I'd say we got to win there.
We absolutely got to win there, and that's why you didn't see anything on his Twitter about this. In fact, I was looking earlier.
Yeah, he's pretty quiet about what's going on in Cowlitz County, isn't he?
Yeah, and it's not surprising. And here's the crazy thing. We're there because he chose to be there.
Right.
Let's full stop. They chose to be there. They sued a Cowlitz County proprietor, and the only option when they took that offensive action was to stay there. I can assure you I'm not dumb enough to say, hey, let's move this to Thurston County while we're in Cowlitz.
Yeah. You're not going to do that? You're not going to offer that?
I might fall for a lot of stuff, but certainly not that. And so when he chose to sue in Cowlitz County, and our buddy Bill Kirk at Washington Gun Law has talked about this. And we talked about it when we've interviewed with them. Going to counties where the judges actually care about the Constitution is really the heart of this fight, which is sad. All judges should.
Right.
Judges shouldn't be swayed by politics.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, we're not seeing that that's the case. And so with that, again, the fact that the judge just says one issue in front of me,
mm-hmm.
What is this? How does the Constitution relate to this question? We're going to probably take 25 pages in the first sets of briefing and then 10 on the back and bring in some experts, which I think is overkill. But quite frankly, that's going to feed really well into our Brumback case, which is the federal corollary. It's the question under the federal Constitution and the state Constitution, whereas this is primarily under the state Constitution with the secondary question of whether it's federally appropriate.
Right.
So it's kind of the inverse of the argument, where we're leading Article 1, Section 24 with support from the Second Amendment. And then when we get into Yakima in federal court, it's going to be the opposite.
Right.
But what it'll allow us to do is, to the extent that we brief, use experts, that's going to just feed right into that other case. So we could actually see potentially an injunction, especially with the Benitez decision in Duncan v. Bonta, subsequently Miller v. Bonta. That could potentially play really well into our Yakima case, again, the federal version of this case.
So let's set the stage here a little bit. So we've talked about Gators, which is the question truly at hand is the so-called large capacity magazines, whether they sold them. That's a particular law that suits about. And then they came out with, and it was 5078, and they came out with 1240, which was the assault weapons ban, which we've touched on a little bit. Now, a lot of our followers, if they're following our Second Amendment fight, are following the Second Amendment fight that's going on in Southern California with the ninth district down the Ninth Circuit,
The district court for
district court
in Southern California,
which is Judge Benitez, and he just came out with. I mean, this is timely. Just came out with his decision on the assault weapons ban law there earlier this year. It was in September.
It was
where was it?
His decision
for the large capacity magazines.
That decision was issued about 2 weeks ago.
That was Duncan.
That came out just a few weeks
Duncan
ago.
v. Bonta, and then we're talking about
Miller v. Bonta.
So these cases are parallel to what essentially what happened was our Attorney General took the laws from California and copy and pasted.
Yeah,
and he's running on that record that, I can take good ideas, so-called good ideas from another state and put them over here, and I can take credit for them. What a great guy. Anyway, so those are running parallel, and everyone has seen those. Not everyone, but a lot of people have seen those decisions. I just filled a call asking about where are we at with our assault weapons ban law here in Washington, because they saw that decision came out in California. So let's set the stage for what bearing do those decisions have on us, and why is it important that we're fighting what we're fighting here in Washington? Why is it necessary that we have this fight going on here?
Yeah, so they're gonna be helpful. When we're in state court, and that's federal court, especially at the district court, that's equivalent to state superior court, so it's the lowest level. It's not going to be controlling. It's going to be extremely helpful, and certainly when a judge says this is unquestionably unconstitutional, it from back to the political standpoint, it's going to give our judges more wiggle room to go towards that side, right? And especially when we're dealing with federal courts, like the Brumback case, Duncan v. Bonta is going to be helpful, because now you're going to have an opinion. So Judge Dimke told us to get together, add more briefing, add more information, talk about the history, talk about the text, talk about the use of the banned magazines. And so the Benitez opinions, specifically the Duncan one, is going to be extremely helpful in saying, hey, your sister court down in Southern California has this 71-page opinion. Like, where do you find fault with that? When we're in the state court, we're certainly going to rely on those decisions, but they're not binding. Not the same way that, for example, one of the courts of appeal from the state of Washington or Washington Supreme Court would. They're helpful. It's interesting, though, that the state seems to argue that Bruin is not binding because we have a different analysis on constitutional issues in Washington state. And it's like, well, that's still how the Supreme Court is telling you, court, to analyze Second Amendment issues. And, oh, by the way, we brought in Bruin. We brought in the Second Amendment. Yeah, the primary concern is Article 1, Section 24 of the Washington Constitution in state court. But those are issues that are supporting, and I wouldn't even call them secondary. They're just not, the spotlight primary issues.
Right.
And so it's going to be extremely helpful. In fact, Austin and I were talking already that he wants to send the Miller opinion over to the county court in Thurston County on our 1240, our assault weapons ban challenge, as supplemental authority. At a minimum, what it does is it builds our record.
Right.
And the state always relies on these federal district courts, like, oh, these 12 in, Chicago and Maryland and wherever, Connecticut. So I guess Chicago, I should say Illinois,
right,
since that's a city, not a state. But they're always relying on these other totally non-binding opinions. And so it'll be nice to have these more homegrown opinions that will help.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I watched a lot of Bill Kirk's videos, and I've just kind of, there's a never-ending list of YouTubers talking about the Second Amendment fight, and overwhelmingly the comments here in Washington from the commenters from Washington, the liberals own the judges, or the left owns the judges, or they're just shills for the AG for Jay Inslee. So where do you think this is ultimately going to go here? Do you think that we have a chance of keeping it in the state, or is this going to have to go to the Supreme Court?
I think. I think it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, both cases, more than likely. But I will also say that, again, if we can get up to the Supreme Court with some winning records, some winning evidence, where they're going to have to tell us why other judges are wrong, that's a whole different question, right? And so when I look at that, this Cowlitz County could be one of the game changers for our Supreme Court. It's clear that it's got a liberal slant, but we've seen a lot of really, I don't want to call them good opinions, but they're 5-4 decisions.
Right.
So, you have 4 people who are willing to dissent.
Mm-hmm.
That's one slide vote, right? And maybe there's somebody who's closet passionate or has been victim of gun violence, or I don't know. There may be one pushing factor where we get a good decision out of the state Supreme Court, but I think the reality is, even if we get that, we still end up in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Bob Ferguson's not going to rest on a loss.
No. Well,
especially right now, we're 12 months out from ballots coming out for his gubernatorial race, right? He cannot take losses on these big issues right now. He can't. He's already getting hit for $4.2 million for, suing nonprofits and claiming that they're not thrift stores, they're not adequately generous. He's not managing things well. I don't know. I don't want to give the guy business advice. I don't want him in my governor, but but he's getting a lot of bad press right now. And could you imagine him starting to have a snowball effect? Like, we win 50-78 in Cowlitz, and then we appeal it up, or the state appeals it up. They lose at the appellate or the Supreme Court, and then they take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And Thomas is going to issue an opinion like, didn't you read Bruin?
Yeah.
That's really all it's going to say.
Yeah.
So
yeah. To that point, do you think we get these wins? We get a win out of Cowlitz County. Do you see them playing, Bob Ferguson specifically, playing some stall tactics to get past his race for governor? Do you think that he stalls us in the court next year, or are there ways for us to push through that?
Well, no, honestly, we get a win in Cowlitz. Let's stall it out, man. That means that it's enjoined.
And it stays.
And we're going to have a standard capacity magazine party day and night.
Yeah.
So, so that's where it's, again, I'm not his political advisor. I don't know what he's going to do. I can only imagine if I'm him and this happened. I've talked a lot about what happened in our Johnson case, Johnson versus Inslee. Jeffrey Johnson, our buddy over in Connell, working for Department of Corrections. We had a judge say this case stays in Franklin County. Literally, I wake up the next day and have an emergency appeal to the state Supreme Court.
Yeah.
There's no way that this question of constitutionality on 1240 gets more than 48 hours of shut-eye before it's appealed to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Well, it's what we're seeing in California, right?
Yeah. Well, it's nuts. With the Duncan v. Bonta case, that thing got an emergency appeal and an emergency decision by the en banc Ninth Circuit, which an en banc panel is not common. Usually 3 judges out of the, I think, 17 will make a decision as to kind of like the procedure of the case, right? That's your standard process. The en banc is the full 17 judges. And in this case, the court said, no, we don't want the 3 of you to hear it. We all want to decide it. And of course, we know what happened there.
Mm-hmm.
They stayed the injunction. And so, yeah, this is one of those things where folks have asked, well, what happens if you win in Cowlitz County? Are we going to get out there and sell a crap ton of magazines? And I said, you're certainly welcome to, but just realize that could be like a 10-day period where the Supreme Court, if it so chooses, could stay that injunction.
Like their week of freedom in California they had a while ago.
Right. And so, it's great. But that's where our battle continues, right? Great. Everybody stock up. But be ready to be shut down fairly quickly too, because I don't trust that the Supreme Court would let it stay that the Supreme Court wouldn't stay an injunction.
Right.
Now, again, to your point, maybe there's political advantage of just taking it on the chin and saying, oh, this is a Superior Court decision. They're fighting us over in Yakima in federal court. That trial, mind you, is pushed out because counsel wanted till February 25. I'll tell you this, I'm not going to stipulate to expediting that. I'm going to drag my freaking feet on that.
February 25 or February 24?
25. Trial for February 25.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize
and
they
so
were pushing that hard.
Austin and I have talked about we're going to push briefing. We're going to expedite it. But you know what? At the same time, we get a win in Cowlitz County. Who the hell cares?
Right.
You know, let them tell us that they want to change the schedule. I'm like, nope, we're not going to agree to that.
Yeah.
No. You know what? Put your resources in Cowlitz.
Like
so I'm excited. I think it is a capital W win.
Yeah.
I mean, to have a judge, and this is really a sad state of affairs, but to have a judge say the Constitution leads these gun questions, that's a big deal for the state. I mean, when we were in Grant and Stevens County, we thought we'd get the same thing, but it was like, nope, punt it to Thurston, and then
not
we know
even going to talk about the Constitution.
yeah, when we know where that went, you know, and we are moving along. I don't want to just focus on 5078 and Gators, but that is a solid victory. But we are moving along our assault weapons ban challenge in House Bill 1240. As everyone will remember, we brought that in Grant. It got bumped to Thurston, and the judge denied our preliminary injunction and our temporary restraining order. And in so doing, we had a briefing requesting what's called discretionary review by the state Supreme Court. And that's, you know, usually a judge, the Supreme Court will only take final decisions, because the preliminary injunction is kind of like a precursor to the final decision. We can't ask them to appeal it or to review that. And we appealed that. And, you know, in looking at that briefing, it was phenomenal. It was a great briefing. There were really 3 questions before the court. But the most important one is whether or not the judge erred in declaring these so-called assault weapons not protected by the Constitution. You know, everything else that flows there under is super important, but that is the leading question. And if the state Supreme Court is willing to review this, even on a limited record that we have, it really, to me, it doesn't matter. Again, when you get these constitutional questions, I look at like Cowlitz County again. I know I'm jumping back and forth. When he says, is this constitutional or not? It's like, do I really need experts? Do I really need history people? And it's like, you know, the way that courts have interpreted Bruin, that's true, but I don't think so. I think there's really just square briefing on whether or not these things, whether it's the assault weapon or the magazine ban, are constitutional. And it's getting fun. It's getting back to what we stand for, which is protecting the constitutional rights that are divinely given by God.
Absolutely.
And that's now our leading edge of our sword. I mean, it's always been the leading edge of our sword, but to have a judge say, yeah, that's the leading edge of the sword is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So I think, you know, we got to shout out that win. Our followers and supporters, you know, you can shout that out as you being part of what we're doing to defend the Second Amendment here in Washington. You absolutely are integral in our success. So thank you for all you're doing and your support, especially our membership. We're enhancing our membership for those of you that may be following along with us or got the email. Our membership is getting better. We're trying to get more organized, create a community, you know, place of safety where we can speak our mind and really talk about the values of that we have. You know, the constitutionality of what we believe in, and the core, really the core of what our focus is the focus on God and country when it comes down to it. And I forget sometimes how simple it is, but really it is our focus on God and country that holds us there. So beyond Second,
I do want to chime in on that membership and the way that we are truly building a community. We get often asked, well, what can I do? And you know, the memberships are $20 a month, and I know for some that's steep, some that's not. And if you really want to get involved and you're like, look, I can't afford that, let us know, and we can, you know, find a way to get you that, because that community is where you're going to have the ability to find more information of what we're doing. I mean, we try to put everything out on social media. Sometimes it just doesn't get there, but it's also going to have that ability, as I understand, to interact, you know, through commenting and that sort of thing. And the question of what can I do to help? you might be on one of our members only forums and say, hey, I've got information on A, B, or C, or hey, whatever the case is, I mean, hey, I just heard that my kid's school district is doing this. What's that look like? And, it might be a way where we can actually, you can help us build a case or strengthen a case through the information and experience you have, or like, hey, I want to be a plaintiff in this because of this. So again, I highly encourage folks to really dig into that membership and to make the use of that communications forum, because that will allow you to help us. Now, I know some folks are like, well, I offered and you haven't hit me up. And it's like, trust us, we're trying our best to get back to everybody's offer. There are just certain fights that we have that are all consuming. We were talking about this earlier. It's like, I'd like to brief out the Gators gun quicker, but if we keep the schedule that was initially proposed, we'd have 3 appellate briefs due on the same day, plus some really substantive briefing, all in the 24-hour period. And what we don't want to do is not do it right. Right. And so if we can push it back a week, while it's not ideal, it gives us an extra week where it's like, okay, we got a bunch of due dates and then a day to let down and then a week to really focus. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously we're going to build it on the front end. So again, just circling back to the membership, there's a lot of value in that for the individual, but there's also a lot of real potential value for us as an organization to have those touch points.
Right. And another kind of question or issue that gets brought up with going back to the gun thing, there's a couple other organizations out there that are fighting the Second Amendment right that have claimed or asked for what's the word that they get when they're
like
part
the
of
organizational standing?
Yeah, the organizational standing, so that their members are covered under their injunction, or we've talked about that. We're not sure about the legality of that, but if there is a case where that is the matter, then our membership, it does fall under that.
Yeah, absolutely. Protection. Absolutely. I mean, to the extent that we get a specific award of protection for our organization, inclusive of its members, that would protect those individuals. There's no question about that.
There's another point that I wanted to clarify and bring up and make sure that they understood that when you are a member, you are part of this organization. You are part of what we're doing, and every bit as important as anybody else in this fight. So we're coming up on the time. I know we've got a lot to do this weekend, and we're heading to Vancouver to meet with some people down there and spread the good word. But we kind of wanted to hit on our medical freedom because it's not really doing anything in the court right now, but it's getting some traction nationwide. We're moving forward. We're seeing a lot of cases come out. What do we got going on currently?
Yeah, I've got a hearing in just shy of 2 hours on Dr. Wilkinson's appeal, and the standard process is that we take an appeal from the Washington Medical Commission's decision and appeal it to the Superior Court. Now, there's an alternative approach to take it direct to the Court of Appeals, which skips one step. And in talking to the Attorney General in that case, the Assistant Attorney General, she said, well, we both know this is going probably to the state Supreme Court, and there's really no way to get it all the way there from this one. What do you think about just jumping the Yakima County Superior Court and getting into Division III Court of Appeals? And I said, I think that's fine. I mean, it allows us to not have to double and triple brief things. We're not now appealing potentially 2 different decisions. We're squarely on one decision and why we think it's wrong. We had also asked for what's called a stay of his compliance time, asking for a pause, and she agreed to that. So, I mean, again, that's not like a huge win, but working with the Attorney General to skip some of the steps in the appeal to get final relief quicker and to give our client relief, in the interim of right. him not having to comply with something that we agree or we believe is unconstitutional, then, I mean, I think those are great wins to shout out too. And so I'll know here in the next couple hours as to whether or not the court is going to tell us, yeah, go ahead and go to the appellate court. If the court doesn't want us to go to the appellate court, that would be interesting because the parties agree that we should go there. And if the court says, hey, I want to keep it, he or she is keeping it for a reason.
Yeah.
And I don't know the judges in Yakima. I can guess that at least some of them have a more conservative slant than certainly folks on other parts of the state. So that could be a good nod. But I expect this thing to go to the Division III Court of Appeals here quickly. And again, that's awesome because it allows our issues to move and advance through the court system, at an expedited rate.
Right. So this is a layman's question. Does this case have bearing on any other licensed defenses that we have lined up?
Sort of. It'll impact because again, you've got 3 divisions of the Court of Appeals, obviously 1, 2, and 3. And 3 is on the east side, defending Dr. Turner, defending Dr. Lynn, who are going to both end up, theoretically there, unless we get a good decision out of the WMC. If we're far enough ahead with Wilkinson's case, and we should be, there may be some binding precedent because the Superior Court and the WMC is going to have to look at it and say, geez, these guys, we know they're going to appeal it, and if they'd appeal it direct to Division III or if they appeal it to, in our case, Benton County Superior Court for Lynn and Turner, and then to Division III, then, we're going to have to figure out a way around the Division III if it's favorable. Obviously, if it's unfavorable, then, yeah, it could impact us also in the negative. But that's what we have to roll the dice with. That's what we're given. So it'll certainly help that. And a Division III opinion, although non-binding, for Thurston County and like Scott Miller's defense, which is down in Vancouver, or Clark County, it'll help, but it won't control it. Certainly, we're going to help Dr. Moon with her licensure issue, which is totally crazy and probably a full subject for another podcast, that she relinquishes her license, and then after you relinquish it, then you have 90 days to decide that you didn't want to. And even after that second set of 90 days, then they came after her for her speech in the Ron Johnson hearing. Right. It's nuts.
I know it's going to be long and drawn out and costly, but I can't help but kind of feel giddy about the fact that this could potentially end up in front of the Supreme Court right back in Washington where it all started, talking about, oh, well, she came and talked to you guys up here, and then she got punished for it. And how is that going to play in front of the Supreme Court?
Can you imagine if Ron Johnson, his office does an amicus brief, or he asks to be a witness? I mean, something of that nature. Whether he does or doesn't, I don't know. But I can't imagine the Supreme Court looking disfavorably on something like that. Like, yeah, I mean, even without it being a U.S. senator, that case gets to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's no question. The only way it doesn't is we run out of funds.
Yeah.
If we're not well supported, and then quite frankly, we hand it off to someone else, which is not ideal. But, we're going to keep working. We're going to keep providing those benefits to our members. We're going to keep hitting folks up and asking for those donations. I mean, we're doing good work and we're starting to see results. I've told the story many, many times that when we first formed the organization, people had asked me, like, they were ready to go out into the streets, we'll call it. And I said, give me 3 years. Give me 3 years. If it can't be fixed in 3 years, then yeah, it's probably sold up the creek. Now, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with everything in the Middle East and how that's going to impact us. So I'm not going to project on that. But what I want to say about that 3-year time frame, I don't know if that was inspired or just a guess, but yeah, it's taken us, we've been around for just over 2 years, 2 years and 3 months, 2.5 months. And we're starting to see these wins start to come, and we're starting to see things change. And that doesn't even look at a potential political change in 2024.
Right.
with the hand we're dealt, we are starting to advance the cause. And I want people to take from this podcast the message of hope. We're seeing wins, little W's and big W's. And I think we're building the record that some of these judges just aren't going to look past. They can't.
Right.
And eventually, at some point, a judge cares about being told no by the superiors. And and I think we're seeing the right tide.
I think so too. So we've talked about the Second Amendment, and we talked about medical freedom, and how the First Amendment applies there. We have an appeal for the end of the year. We're fundraising specifically to bring another attorney on, and you and I have talked about this, and I think it's in formation still, but we'd like to bring someone on to focus specifically on religious freedom.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've got a couple people in mind. We identified one who's absolutely interested, and then we actually had at a meeting a woman that came in from Spokane who's already volunteering. And she's got a great medical background, so she's going to help benefit that. So, I mean, we've got our fingers on the pulse for where we want to grow, and how we want to grow, and what we want to do with those people's talents. It's just a simple question of whether or not we can fund it. Right now, to your point, we can't. And so I know we always talk about this in every podcast, and we try to shout this out. Your donations matter. I mean, when we turn our taxes into the IRS, the money goes into overhead, which is all the operational costs, the filing fees, and the salaries of our employees and our contractors. That's where it goes. I mean, no one's living a crazy high life on this. We're working our tails off to make sure that we're able to stand, between the state, God, and the Constitution.
Right.
Because the state doesn't seem to care about those two others.
Not at all. So yeah, so we are definitely fighting that fight, and we'd love to be able to take on some of those religious fights that the religious liberty, and really bring God back into our lives as much as we can, whether it be in school for our kids or just in our daily lives, where we feel like we can't speak and we can't pray and we can't worship the way that we want to. That's such a big part of our life, and where we're going personally, as well as we'd like our community to be there too. So we've come up on time. I know you mentioned you got court later this afternoon. Anything else you want to add to our followers here?
Yeah, just some of the other things that we've discussed in our staff meetings are really these ideal ways of potentially really pulling back on the parental rights, keeping them in-house, and protecting students from some of the violence that's occurring on campus, right? When these educators believe their hands are tied. So little Jimmy flips out and, throws a chair or something, or, we see all the TikTok and YouTube videos of just kids pummeling one another. And part of the issue is these teachers and other administrators at the school feel like their hands are tied. Well, we've got some concepts on how to pull that back. Whether or not, we're actually going to get there is a separate question. But that's something that, we've got in queue for as we have the ability and bandwidth to grow. And, again, the appeal to add to our staff is not so that, the current attorneys, our other support staff, that we're going to be on vacation and someone else is going to pick up the slack, right? I mean, I'd like to take a vacation, but not permanently. And so when we make this appeal for these extra work, it's because there's a lot that hits that's really critical to saving our nation that we just can't get there. I mean, like I said, with Gators, I'd love to brief that a week earlier as the state suggested. Mm-hmm. That was a schedule I wanted. But given our bandwidth, sure, we could do it with zero sleep and we can get through that. But is it going to be our best product? No. And it'll be great product, but it's not what it could be if we're not able, if we're constantly frenetic.
Yeah. Well, and from my perspective, every time we've brought on another head to help, we don't just add, one person's work. It grows what we do exponentially. It truly does. It truly grows, doubles, triples, quadruples what we can accomplish. Because I mean, it's just synergy, right? We all understand the way that concept works. The more hands doing the work, the lighter the load, and that's really what we're trying to get. We want to do better work. We want to do more work. We want to really represent our followers and supporters. So that's what we're working towards. That's what we're fundraising on and talking about going into the end of the year and going into the next year. Because 2024, that's that third year you were talking about. We don't want people in the streets doing what they do in the streets. We want our law and order. We want our Constitution to be protected, and we want our families to live the way that we imagined we'd be living right now, with all the benefits and great things that are coming from technology. We want to still maintain those liberties and freedoms that we have. So, thanks for listening. Pete, it's awesome. We got some good updates. I got some good wins, and be on the lookout for some more updates. I think some more stuff's coming down the pipeline shortly. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you next time.